surprised they didn't like, because the idea of fear was saved in my mind. We not imagine stepping outside and playing on the street. Similarly, we have this favorite notion that is colors are beautiful to kids, but then they show these pictures and they found the colors too chaotic. So we had different inferences coming from this picture survey. In the second part, we gave them an imaginary situation where we asked them what about a person for a day and they had to design the street. How would they design the street? So I would like to take you back to case study. This study that I want to talk with school students of class 6 and class 7. And we have again predefined functions that the so we have a predefined notion that the kids won't be having a lot of information when it comes to being politically aware or aware about the standard of road. But we had interesting observations that kids knew what is nation building and what are the all-weather roads. And we had beautiful pictures where they knew about the dustbins, about the two different types of garbage that is being segregated. So a lot of interesting conversations emerged when we were asking students to do this. In the third part, this was done with the students as well as the pedestrian outside the school, where we showed them the pictures of their streets only that the Rajput Road had, and then we had two pictures of the beautiful streets around, and then we asked them to highlight the elements which were beautiful to them. So coming to the conclusion, we inferred that nature, clean streets, dustbin safety, flowers, fragrance, and vehicle-free were the elements that the students liked the most. Then another layer of citizen engagement that we did was with Mr. Lakishori. He's a very famous anthropologist based in Dehradun. He was our local expert. Then we had certain discussions with Mr. Ashish Srivastava. He is the former CEO of the Smart City project in Dehradun and currently serving as an IAS. And then we had Mrs. Premlata. She was the principal of GGIC school, and the parents and the students and the other pedestrians who use these areas. Coming to the context of appraisal, another point that we understood that the children's point of view and the elders' point of view in that street is very different. So we clicked pictures from children's point of view and understood what are elements on the walls and the footpaths that are highlighted, and then tried to do the activity mapping. So we were there for a week-long time, and we mapped the activities in the morning and the afternoon sessions. So how the kids are coming to the school and going back. Again, the layer of traffic analysis that we did. Out of all these, we had a group of issues that were identified. For example, certain persons' safety issues, lack of mobility options, the vehicles were parked on the no parking zones, and often on the footpath. All of this results into an analysis where we are looking at three different levels. The first one is the site visit and interaction with the stakeholders. Then the community participation. All of this comes to an end where we strategize our aim and vision. So the aim and vision that we come up with the inferences was the nature-infused emotive playscape. So we are looking at how study, play, and stay can happen simultaneously on the street. In the next slide, I'll just go through the plans and the imagination that we did for that particular street. So for one example, we imagined as one of the corner as a public zone and tried to incorporate the elements such as the apron art around the walls and the sitting spaces which is related to the ghats and water bodies, and have certain native trees around. In the second picture, you can see this is outside the school. So we tried to provide certain sitting spaces for the kids along the boundary wall. Another issue that often came was the safe crossing zones. So we incorporated a crossing zone right outside the school, and the central spiring had a lot of play zones and play areas where the kids could stand and wait for their buses to board or deboard. I think that's it from my side, and what we can do with the information is we have a very context-based understanding. The same understanding or the methods could be applied to different contexts, and the inferences could help us to understand what the kids actually want, and the kids could be an active participants while we are designing the road. So we are not designing and implementing on them, but we design and implement the same thing. And almost every day I used to go there and have share and discussions and stay there for like very long hours. So, and again the people from GGIC school, all the faculty members, all the students who were there, and the former CEO, Mr. Srivastava, he also took us time and he was part of the final jury that we gave at Cafe Lata. And this was also covered by Times of India. But now I'm leaving you all with the question. So this is a study, but unfortunately it is remaining to the conferences or to a report, but it is not being implemented. We have already submitted the proposals, but I don't know, I'm here for help. So if anybody has an option to collaborate or to take up something similar initiatives, we are open to discussions. Thank you.
Now over to session chair.
So there for a week. For a week, from Monday till Saturday we were there, and for the school we had different activities planned. One day we were doing the survey outside the school. Then we had to take certain permission for the ethical duty that we are performing this with the students and everything. So it took some time. So in the last 2 or 3 days we went to the kids and did it inside the school.
And after you design this place, you go back to the students.
Yes, we had 2 rounds of discussion. The first, where the principal and the Miss Shivani was there as a teacher. She was there, and they had reviews. They had given certain reviews, and the latest year also when we had a jury at Dehradun, so they were present. The kids, unfortunately, all of them were not present, but the teachers were.
Actually, children's perception are also formed by whatever they have been exposed. So, how did you try to incorporate things which they might not be, they might not be have prior experience of, but through your through your experiments, they would have come across that these things might also be used or might also can also come as part of design.
Okay, so to our surprise, we went there with very low expectations. Like it was a government school, so we have questioned that. Like our canvas was very blank. So we anticipated that we would be telling them a lot, but it was an opposite. Like we got to learn a lot from them. We were a little more aware from what we had thought. And then what we said that we had to incorporate certain things that they were not aware of. For example, they haven't been to Jaipur ever. We had a picture of Jaipur where there were procession taking out for teas, and then we were telling, okay, so these kinds of activities are also possible on streets. So that is how we help them understand what are the different possibilities that can happen. So that was the discussion we had with them.
Like when you were designing this for crossing, there was a traffic accident. So the signal also in many cases can incorporate crossing, pedestrian crossing. So which the students might not be aware of, but this can be a
But
design.
they were aware. One of the kids, I think, there was a deep discussion with one of the girls there. I remember, and she mentioned they had a sketch of her also. She said that there should be a push button there, and like that would help us. Maybe she had seen it in a movie or in an advertisement. So the last corner, if you see, so she mentioned that she would like to have a push button so it's safe for her to cross the roads. So that kind of awareness was present there. This was a design studio. research papers, or do they just start from beginning? I just have a question, like you said.
Very difficult
Because,
question you are
because
asking.
I've always seen that they start with the fresh, like they don't. I have not seen them going through the research papers or actually using student thesis to do this.
For this, I can answer this. You work, and if somebody, so definitely somebody will approach you. But for that, you need to have some research papers or through which one can recognize. That is the first, because you are at a very young stage. So I am also at a very young stage. So in that way, we can do collaboration with the government. To convince them, we need to have some, not only one paper, but yes, multiple papers on different subjects.
And also you can you can approach corporates for the CSR activities. Talk to them about do a cost analysis and how much cost will be required for
There are a lot many more.
it can be a face thing where you do just some packaging, some by using paint and some temporary things, which can be the first phase, and if successful, it can be implemented further.
But yesterday I was telling the whole session, like it is not a straight path, it's a zigzag. So the same way if you
And then we rub it up.
there are a lot of thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Now we have paper ID 36. Paper ID 36. Good afternoon, everyone.
And also
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jishta from Institute of Architecture and Planning, Nirma University. I will be presenting our paper titled as Walkability as a Measure for Improving Visitor Experience in Udaipur, co-authored with Dr. Manjali Mohit. Yes, exactly. Okay. So, talking about walkability, it simply means how easy and safe is a place to travel on foot rather than opting for a vehicle. From a tourist perspective, walkability is very different because they are generally pressed for time and are unfamiliar with the place. Most of the people prefer traveling and exploring on foot, so it's important we talk about tourist walkability. Globally, cities such as London, Kyoto, and Barcelona have been implementing many changes for improving their overall pedestrian experience and infrastructure. Even in India, historic cities such as Jaipur and Ahmedabad were built walkable long before motorized transportation came. Like much of India's old cities, Udaipur's core was built for pedestrians and bullock carts, not for cars. Narrow lanes and continuous street frontage, everything within walking distance. That's exactly why Udaipur is a good case study for this. But modern tourist volumes and vehicle inclusion is testing that legacy of Udaipur. So the study area, as I said, Udaipur, it lies in the southern part of Rajasthan. It is known as the city of Udaipur is one of the cities which has seen growing tourism all from the globe in India. And the circuit that we select lies in the major core, uh, heritage core of the city. It includes 6 stops, which are Jagdish Temple, Bengal Ghat, Bagor Ki Haveli, Lal Ghat, City Palace, and Radha Vallabhi Temple, also known as Jalsangi Temple. The whole circuit is 1.1 kilometer in length. It can be covered within 15 to 16 minutes. Every key destination lies within the range of lies within 500 meter of range. Udaipur, if we talk about the whole Udaipur city, it sees more than 50,000 pedestrians every day, and still there is less than 1% the pedestrian infrastructure which is actually usable. Factors affecting walkability. So there are 5 dimensions that we thought would be the best to analyze the streets and the pedestrian infrastructure. Density, which is the concentration of attraction, activities, and the built form. Diversity is mix of land uses and the variety that is present. Design is the overall visual character, footpath continuity, street furniture, etc. Destination accessibility tells us how easy it is to reach the destination, and distance to transit is the proximity of public transport from each location. Talking about the methodology, after the literature review, we selected the 5D framework. Data was collected using Google Street View imagery and Google Maps, and we draw indications, and the data was collected from there. We also referred to literature. Uh, Let me just review how we scored each dimension. So density was scored taking we considered number of tourist activities, how much of the tourist activities are present per 100 meter, and then we scored based on that. For the design, we had we subdivided into 3 categories. One was for footpath, one was for the signages present, and one was for how much of the pedestrian space that is present is being encroached and not usable. Diversity is again the number of distinct land use categories present, and destination accessibility is we calculated as per the walking time uh, needed to reach each destination, and distance to transit was measured by seeing which bus stop or parking area is present and how far are they. Talking about planning, so density and diversity, we cut the whole circuit into the 4 segments and studied the whole segment on the basis of all the 5 dimensions. Density scored the best among all the dimensions. The whole circuit was densely packed with a lot of activity and footfall. In the diversity, you can see that the segment number 3, which is Lal Ghat to Badi Pol, it scored very high on density, scored very less in diversity, which we got to know that even though it was dense and had a great street, shops and everything, the variety of that was very limited. So, design dimensions, it was the most weak point of the circuit. None of the segments scored more than 4, and there were irregular streets, narrow streets, but they could have been worked out in a better way. Even if there were footpaths, they were not being utilized, and there was a lot of encroachment either by the vendors or the vehicles. Destination accessibility, all destinations are 5 meter apart, and the loop is comfortably explored on foot. Distance to transit was again a weak point, which we found out that every bus stop is approximately 20 to 30 minutes from each destination, making the route very car dependent or private vehicle dependent. The Talking about the complete overall composite score, we average out, and uh, the whole circuit scored well, exceptionally well in diversity, but design was very poor. It needed more work so that uh, it becomes physically more comfortable to travel over the circuit. Conclusion: three of the four segments in the diversity segment, scored between 4.4 to 4.6, driven by the dense mix of short and cultural activities. Density also holds up well. Design, again, failures across all the segments. And transit, again, design and transit was one of the major most required when we talk about walkability, and they both score very less. Prior to the study, we also saw the research of the walk score. So the circuit scored more than 90, which and it classified as the walker's paradise. High score attributed to density and proximity of essential activities, and after analyzing it through the five walkability, we validated all findings, and the area of potential was basically in street design, pedestrian infrastructure, and overall pedestrian experience. Some of the recommendations we feel can be done to further improve the experience can be talking about particular segment, Jagdish Temple to Bengal Ghat, which scored really less on the design segment. We can add at least minimum amount of footpath on at least one side of the street because it sees one of the heaviest tourist footfall because of the temple visitors and ghat access. We can also introduce timed pedestrianization either during the peak tourist season or early morning or late evening hours, which is the evening aarti and the mandir crowd. Lal Ghat to Vadipol segment, although the streets were uh, less encroached, the narrow lane, the shopkeepers have extended their, you know, shops till that. So we can work on that. Uh, in the Vadipol area, footpaths already exist. So instead of new construction or anything like that, we can introduce enforcements that either we can make vendor designated spaces and no parking zones so that the footpaths stay free. We can also add seating near the major tourist, near the major segments so that even if it is 150 or 200 meter, during hot summers, people need to sit down and relax. And the transit point that the bus stops and public services are not present uh, with the required time limit. So we can introduce an e-rickshaw shuttle loop every 15-20 minutes, which can be very beneficial for the visitors. And we can also introduce signages and everything for the historic buildings that are there.
Like you said, these roads initially when they were designed pedestrians. Yeah. This is the older core of it. They were designed, since they were designed for pedestrians, they had neutral shading from the buildings and it was very well designed. So now when you are
some study, and then based on that analysis, you will say yes, these are the 5 or 4 indicators which are more relevant, and you have done the study, further study on those only, not consider the overall indicators. Yes. Thank you. Next one, please.
Moving on to our next resolution, we have paper ID 44. Paper ID 44.
Everyone. Myself Kunal More. I recently completed my urban design from Village College of Architecture. It is in November, and I recently joined as an intern in WRI India uh, uh, on my thesis itself. So they selected on my thesis. So basically, my research topic is urban design framework for assessing walkability through a multi-parameter approach in the congested transit-oriented zone. Evidence from Kurla. Why access capability is conducted in TOD? Basically, in global south context, uh, there is lot of footfall there we can see, and in Mumbai TOD challenges, the middle photo is around is of the other transit precinct, where is 5 to 6 lakh people use daily commute. And even the research problem identification was to just quick count the number of users who is not using, that is 1 2 3 4 5 6, and then 8 one was using the footpath. So 8 out of 1 just choose the footpath to walk on. Then my hypothesis is in congested Mumbai pedestrian walk of necessity, not so adapting to unsafe and poorly designed street to poorly used street, improving spatial design safety and comfort can transform this forced movement into a positive place-based walking experience. So these are some prominent issues. I will quickly run through the slides. So there is lack of safety, you can see, then the poor street environment, then safety concern is there. Then why Mumbai? Mumbai, uh, the rail is the heart of Mumbai, as we know.
We can skip this.
Okay. So, so basically, I am measuring the walkability. So there are three walkability index are present there. First is walk score, then global walkability index, and the national walkability index. So basically, walk score is having nearby amenities. So it may not applicable for Indian context, because as we left our home, we can find a grocery around our house only. Then the global walkability index. So the measures are too much complicated for the Indian cities. That is so comprehensive and policy oriented. And in India, Indian walkability index, that measures the footpath. In some places there are no footpath as you see, and the second measures national walkability index is pedestrian facility rating. Sorry. So research lab is existing method access infrastructure and accessibility, but failed to capture pedestrian behavior, informity, and TOD challenges. This is my proposed framework for this research. That is multi-parameter assessment, then expert weighting using AHP method, then corridor level analysis. I will be selecting sites, then the corridor itself.
I think it's more interesting if you're talking about the methodology, because we have already done this.
Okay, so basically the objectives are develop, evaluate, and identify. So first is parameter weighting, then site selection. then the field survey, probability assessment, then NW calculation. So the framework includes 9 vocability assessment parameters that is taken from the National Vocability Index. I added 2-3 more as per urban design context, because the National Vocability Index are not driven to the behavior challenges which people are facing. So the parameters are safety, width, crossing facility, sanitization and maintenance, microclimate comfort, continuity, surface condition, universal accessibility and obstructions. So basically, how to number them? That is the main question. So I get an Google form for the expert parameter reviews. I like to share with you guys.
We have 5 more minutes. We have 3 students.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, based on that, I selected the parameter, weighing parameter. So these are the Google form actually. So there are 12 experts with are 30, 50 plus years of experience in urban design and transportation. So they weigh the parameter. So study area and site selection. So I gone through eight sites in the Mumbai, which is mostly transit congested zone. So then I go through the evaluation method and choose 3 prominent sites, that is Kurla, Dadar, Matunga. So the selection criteria is transit oriented and hyper pedestrian volume, mixed land use and walkability challenge. So these are the selected site according to congested at transit zone. So first is Dadar, that is famous Dadar West, that is famous for the flower market. So we can see the encroachment of the vendors there. So we just get 0.8 meters of footpath for the walking instead of 1.8 meters. The vendors are encroached the footpath. Then Kurla West, that is multimodal transit. Multimodal model as in there is also an BST bus running there, and also autos are there, and also private buses are there. So on 30-meter ROW with no footpath, I have documentation of all of this. I will be sharing in the end of that slide. Then Matunga is the educational hub, and you can see that parking blocks bus stops and enforcement is needed. So in the other activity mapping, I just mapped the which are the lanes are prominent, which is a famous spot, and which are the main issues in there. Then Kurla. In Kurla, there is 38 meter, as I said, meter of ROW with no footpath and even no shaded trees are there. And around Kurla is having around 4 lakh people footfall was there. Then the Matunga, it is basically an educational hub where most famous colleges are there, and even that is the Pie Garden is very famous space was there. So here also you can see there is some kind of the footpath are present here, but it have some encroachment or the sittings. That is a nice part. The sitting was there. As in Vachanalaya, we say in Marathi. So this is the NWR calculation process. So first of all, the parameter selection with AHP, then weight assessment, that is a normalized weight. Then segment of study area, that I actually took segment of all study areas as in 500 to 950 meter of distance, which is As in, if there is 500 meter segment, I will be taking 100 meter each. Then each 100 meter will have this 9 parameter assessment weighting. So we can get accurate data from it. So uh, uh, so can find the NWI calculation. So this is the method. First, we select the parameter which I already selected and divide the study corridor. I am just quickly go through it. Then calculate weight for the every segment. Then calculate the PER, that is pedestrian facility rating, PFR again on my bad. Then calculate the availability of work, and last is the NWI index, that is 0.4 into AF into 0.6 into PFR. Then this is the national workability index calculation parameters of all sides. I calculate. I will quickly like to share it. Okay. There is the other Kurla and Matunga. So after the assessment, I got to know that Kurla have a very low walkability national walkability index score. Then I mapped Kurla of 950 meters. Uh, so there is the I just quickly go to it. The road width is the main issue there. The 38-meter road and 16-meter road. So the road width is varying over there. Varying, as in it is creating bottleneck for the users. So issues. So basically, there are 11 issues are find out in the Kurla corridor.
Yeah, that will discuss, yes.
So these are the interventions, but that may or may not be useful because it will be a piece of paper for that thing. I just wanted to tell that we can use, uh, we can have a short span to calculate as Shreya Energy ma'am said. Hmm. So as Shreya Banerjee ma'am said, the data is missing for the ULVs and all to get. So this is a data oriented thing, that is access score, prioritized and improved. So these are the contributions from Jenga's Jeff Spec and all. I just wanted to share one more video. It is an website that is Mapillary, and we can map the whole street with our phone itself.
Yes,
I just
there
wanted
are
to share.
methods for that, but we are concluding from our side. So,
Actually, we need the venue for the next session, so we cannot exceed the time.
Yeah, sure.
But we can do it definitely post the session.
Sure, sir.
And also, you can also share the link with all of us on the Zoom.
Sure.
Right?
It's just 30 seconds video.
Actually, we're running.
Yeah, sure, sure. My bad.
Sorry.
I guess the one thing which I point out is from the street, how the road of the interface of the street, the sidewalk and the building. You would have heard about Rise on Street, but why it doesn't make walking safe. So have you considered that? How have you considered? You haven't considered the edges.
Yeah, edges as in I mapped the building use there. So
Yeah,
most of the
but the building used to have a boundary wall and it may make it unsafe.
most of the in case of Kurla, most of the users are mixed use. So they have the vending there.
Assumption, so this framework might not be transferable to another precinct. Might not have a use.
But no, I just mapped Kurla out of it. I'm not talking about the whole framework.
my concern is whenever we do this comparison, you are saying based on one street, you are saying the whole city. In urban design or in these kind of studies, we can have homogeneous, so that we can say yes, in this street and the another street and the third one, there is a difference. Each aspect based on one street, so you would say this whole city
that is one my point over
That we
presenting this.
cannot do in our design. That for that we need to do that.
Okay.
Yes.
So just wanted
Yes,
to say
it's
something.
a very
Acha,
new
okay.
statement, but yes, we can do. Yes.
Yeah. Just we have to start from small thing. We can't change whole city. So it is an yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have with us paper ID 19. Paper ID 19.
Just a quick announcement. We'll be doing very strictly 10 minutes, right? So we're going to give an indication at 8 minutes, and then in 2 minutes you're going to have to finish. Right? And then we have a question and answer at the end.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Suhas Jadwani and I have covered this paper titled Beyond Footpath Sketches as Determinants of Walkability. We both are from SEP University and I'm an undergraduate student. I would like to start with this presentation by asking you a small question. In front of you are two scenarios, A and B. I would like the audience to give me a show of hands and choose which among the two photographs you consider more pedestrian friendly. Please give me a quick response with a show of hands. A, obviously A. Sir said that right. But so most of us would go with this assumption, looking at the photograph with wide footpaths, pedestrian scale lighting, and a shaded walkway and organized infrastructure. On the other hand, B has narrow, interrupted footpath, lack of shade, and spillovers or informalities existing. But what if I prove the otherwise? And this is where the paradox lies. According to the assessment that we have carried forward, by calculating the amount of space walked by a pedestrian on the footpath versus off the footpath, the case B performed almost similar, or in fact slightly better, with a 2% increase than the better organized and pedestrian friendly street. This scenario could be of any streets in the world, in India, but this is a very specific case of two very different streets with very different stories of Ahmedabad, Western Ahmedabad. So on the right hand side, you have Driven Road closer to the Sabarmati River, which was developed during the early 1990s and the early 2000s. So the planning schemes, the FSI regulations, all of this was very different for Driven Road. On the other hand, you have Sindhu Bhavan Road, which was developed after 2010 with a very modern planning and development scheme, leading to a very contrasting and starkly different environments in both the cases, allowing us for an examination. Now, the basic and the most dominant framework we look at in India is the IRC guidelines, but the focus here is always footpath, which is accepted land, adjacent land use, and obstruction-free walking zone. It excludes signages, poles, and all of that. But the clear gap over here is that it identifies only obstruction-free movement, and that is the underlying assumption that fewer the interruptions, the better is the pedestrian experience. This framework raises an interesting question. Does an unobstructed path automatically create a better walking experience? Many scholars, in fact, argue against this. We have Adenser, Dissertive, and a lot of other scholars talking about meandering, negotiating, and navigating through the social habitation of the street. And this is where the actual gap lies. Walking is generally an obstruction-free movement. When we walk constantly, we are responding to comfort, visibility, activity, social presence, and opportunities for interaction. And that is what is missing in the urbanism discourse. And what is left is movement alone. The study therefore shifts from footpath to relationship between the pedestrian and the adjoining edge of the built environment. And the conceptual framework is thus this interface of the threshold between the public and the private realm, where the built environment is actually a precondition that shapes the social occupation of the street, and the social occupation is what informs the walking experience. And thus there is a direct or indirect relation with built environment. Now, these social occupations exist on the street could be looked at with the concept of externalities, where the externality means indirect costs or benefits which are to a third party who are not involved in the original process. Consider, for example, an instance where a shop or a vendor extends his activities onto the footpath. Now, he might profit from with the business, but it also attracts a pedestrian can't interrupt, but you might also have increased surveillance due to eyes on the street and pause opportunities. Conversely, a blank wall may inadvertently encourage dumping, reduce pedestrian engagement, and create a sense of isolation. In both these cases, the effects extend beyond the immediate property and are experienced by the wider public realm. However, the impact on a pedestrian would starkly vary in both these cases, allowing us to further categorize them as positive and negative externalities. Now, if I simply construct an obstruction versus movement diagram of both the streets as per an obstruction-free walking zone, what IRC recommends, on an overall length of approximately 800 meters for each case, you get this sort of a diagram. And every time an obstruction occurred, so the attempt was to continuously try and walk on the footpath as much as possible in the attempt of making this diagram. And every time an obstruction occurred along the trail, it was recorded as an externality. In case A, the footpath was taken over by parked vehicles for longer stretches. In case B, more number of interruptions occurred frequently at shorter distances. As a result, the pedestrian is displaced every 266 meters, which is you have larger lengths of walking, and B, it is 45 or 46 meters, which is very frequent. But this is not the end of the calculation because additionally the diagram also represents something very interesting. If you just look at the top edge or edge 1 in case A, you have only one positive externality against 2. So it's a ratio of 1:3. But in case B, you see almost 50-50. So there are equal number of positive and equal number of negative opportunities coming up. And that's where actually the paradox sets in. That is why when we calculated the amount, the lengths of yellow lines that are on the footpath versus off the footpath, surprising dip of 2% was observed in Sindhu Bhavan Road with a more walkable and pedestrian friendly infrastructure. Now, to decode this anomaly, we went beyond the scroll and we selected smaller instances that occurred along this 800-meter length. Approximately 8 instances, so 1 per 100 meter was found. And in case, for example, let's take one. The commercial front of most stores in Sindhu Bhavan Road or KSA with a designated parking space occurred between the commercial edge and the footpath. So the parking space is sandwiched between the pedestrian and the commercial edge, leading to a diminished sense of visibility or cross visibility, even though the ground floor is porous. So cutting off visual connection. Similarly, in case of residential edges, a wide margin space with a defensively huge compound wall distance the pedestrian from the footpath because activities such as garbage, utility dumping, and extremely dead and inactive edges come. And as a photograph, you can see the person not walking on the footpath, but it's actually an extra paved zone for parked vehicles. On the other hand, in case B, major difference that was observed was usually extended up to the plot edge because of older planning schemes or had very minimal margins. As a result, the shop spilled over with goods and activities on the footpath and the parking came after the footpath. So now the pedestrian was right next to the plot edge and not sandwiched between the plot edge and the parking space. So now this attracted the pedestrian back on the footpath even though he or she was constantly displaced off because of some sort of social activities that occurred along the edge. Now this is the case of a commercial front, but even in case of residential realms or institutional edges, we see that the street attracted some sort of social occupation either as vending or religious activities through small shrines that dotted the footpath. Such instances were documented only after examining a number of times. They occurred in either cases, maintaining a balance between a sort of a pattern that was coming up and a uniqueness of each instance. Some of the conditions, in fact, were seen in both the cases. So some of A's were seen in B and B was seen in A. So it was also a vice versa thing. Now, such conditions were empirically also observed through my 4 months course of research. I observed these instances to occur along other streets of the city as well, and these were recorded through photographic evidence. For instance, the same underlying condition of a compound wall about 2 meters high next to a footpath leads to 3 different scenarios. The first that I show you here is where there is infrastructure and utility dump. The second is where there is parking, and the third is there a social occupation of the street by a vendor and a school stall. These very nuanced understandings of this interface allowed for classification of classification led to a taxonomy of interfaces with a limited case that I had, and it was not predetermined. So the limited of 8 into 2 plus both the streets, it became a 3.2 kilometer. And across this, we got 4 axial categories of street edges with high boundary walls and deep setbacks, often produced one among these 3 scenarios that I suggested, which became defensive interfaces. On the other hand, we had second category of negotiated interface where the pedestrian specifically came around commercial edges and would have to tactically negotiate or navigate through the social occupation. If you just carefully look at the walled market negotiated interfaces second example, this is about the previous speakers are also talking about that now a lot of vendors are pushed inside open grounds and just high compound walls in Ahmedabad and calling that an informal market or a formalization of the informal market. Similarly, we have the residual interfaces with wide margins, and the mediated interfaces were the best among these 4 categories because there was sort of an affordance which Kim Ravi suggests through informal seating or informal vending with with low seated, low height compound walls. Now, after getting these instances, I just juxtaposed them. So, all the 8 instances were juxtaposed for the cases, and a cumulative width was determined. So in case B it was 0.5, but in case A it was 0.9, and both of these are far below the average that we need. Now this demonstrates that it's not neither of the two streets win, but in some scenarios one was better and the other is the other. Now the major edge effect that I'm talking about, or the problem is that when we compare Ahmedabad to global cities, we are still giving a lot of margin spaces, and our policies are still not moving beyond the idea of coming to the built edge. Global cities are able to do that. Thus, the amount of land available to the private person or the private property is much more in case of Indian cities than the Western cities, and that's where the major problem lies. I'll just conclude by saying that the edge effect is not something that we need to rethink or recalibrate because conditions like Otla, which is an inhabitable threshold, existed in the coal settlements of Ahmedabad and even the Dutch tubes and a lot of other things that we talked about. But 2 interesting examples. One on the top is the Japanese. It's a new participatory approach where they are reclaiming public spaces by carving out spaces from private properties. On the other hand, we have that top-down approach policy making in Singapore, where there are no boundary walls between any private property either. So we need to relook at such measures. And to conclude, this research makes 3 contributions. First, it proposes a way of understanding walkability through the relationship between interfaces, occupations, and externalities. Second, it develops a taxonomy of 4 interfaces that can be used to analyze street edges, but this is with a limited case sample. And third, it demonstrates that pedestrian experience cannot be understood through infrastructure or movement alone. And the comparison between the 2 streets suggests that active and porous interfaces play a critical role in shaping movement. And the methodology of identification, abstraction, comparing, and diagram types can be taken forward. So, yeah, the footpath is important, but equally important are edges that animate it. Thank you.
They also have suggested guidelines for street that can be incorporated.
Which software are used so that the public get to know if you did, they also convert or merge some images with some software and they said how you have calculated the score that you will get before came out. So that we not discuss. That was actually involved. That is a part of methodology. Okay. So that was missing. That is a suggestion that you can incorporate also.
Sure. Do you want me to answer that now in one sentence?
Uh-huh.
In terms of software, it's just AutoCAD, and I just literally overlapped all of them, and I considered a minimum of 60 centimeter orbital space, and I overlapped all of that. So 60 is something that Newport suggests, right? And when I overlapped all this, I got 8 sections, and I overlapped all 8 of them for each case. I saw that it fell below in 60 centimeter, whether I was on the was a little more, about 90 centimeters in case A.
That's nice. If you're already talking about this, you have to include that in the methodology. That will make it more constructive.
Thank you.
Next we have paper 37. Paper ID 37. Good afternoon, everyone. This is I'm currently at my third year B Plant undergraduate in School of Planning and Architecture, Vijayawada. So this paper has been co-authored with one of my faculty members, Ms. Zorba, who is an assistant professor at SPAB. So the research paper is a non-equilibrium systems approach to urban streets, quantifying spatial competition and pedestrian marginalization in Hyderabad. So first we need to understand what are the existing challenges in urban streets, why do we need to consider and why do we need to think about them, and what are the problems right now. So around 56% of local population lives in urban areas, between 68%, but our streets are finite resources of physical space. But the contestations of the user number is always increasing. So right now we have multiple street assessments and parameters. For example, we have capacity analysis like IRC, HCM, and LOS and B by C ratios. But all of this only for the capacity and the infrastructure. Whereas we also have walkability assessment, but they refer to pedestrian infrastructure and comfort. And as well we have traffic and infrastructure assessment and then planning and governance framework. But all of this, like capacity analysis is infra. Then again, walkability assessment talks about more pedestrian infrastructure comfort. But there is not one integrated framework where we can combine all of this and understand an urban street as a whole with all its roadside frictions and dynamics. So the gap identification. So my research has identified few significant gaps in urban streets. So first one is that all of the indicators that I previously spoke on in the last slide quantify only the infrastructure and comfort, whereas we are in need to quantify spatial competition among multiple users for a finite space and in functional street capacity in real operating conditions like peak hours and others, and then pedestrian marginalization due to unequal space allocation, and in dynamics of spatial organization over time, and the need for governance-driven street space allocation. So I have formulated a detailed research framework starting from problem identification, literature, and study design data collection. So the study area is Hyderabad. So Hyderabad is a metropolitan city and it is experiencing rapid urbanization. So I have selected three key corridors: Amirpet, SR Nagar, and Panchakula. All of these three corridors are very commercialized, and a few corridors also exhibit tourism, high level of tourist and pedestrian users. So these corridors are important in understanding how different types of context-sensitive approaches we need for urban streets. So the primary data collection has been comprised of spatial survey, tempo survey, and then behavioral survey, and then comes data processing, and then the development of indices and analysis, and then the framework validation. So starting with the actual content, what is non-equilibrium street system? Right now we have conventional approaches which treat streets as a linear structure, just the physical geometry and related infrastructure. So why is non-equilibrium street system approach required? So we have four images of streets of Hyderabad. These are images from the core area. So at morning 6:30 a.m. it's relatively less congested. We have very few pedestrians and vehicles, and then during lunch hours, peak hours, we have like high vehicle density, and then we have parkings and then other activities, and then from 4:30 we see better expansion, and then by 6:30 it is peak hour. We have tourists, we have better expansion, we have bustling commercial activities, and this creates a very vibrant ecosystem over there. But this also leads us to chaos, and then we have accidents. So these areas require intense traffic management. So it is the same 7-meter road, but in different times it performs different functions. So the key characteristics of non-equilibrium street system is non-linearity, path strategy with 3 corridors, and then 18 segments in each 3 corridors, multiple streets we have chosen, and then the data collection methods, as I mentioned earlier, behavioral observation, temporal sampling, and then spatial measurement of the physical infrastructure, and then go towards 3-stage analytical process, starting from quantifying spatial supply demand, and then computing the indices that we have proposed, and then comparative and correlative analysis. So on with this slide shows an example of the segment level analysis that we have done. So these are images of 100 segments of the road, 100 sections of road. So here we have to map the 10-meter land use towards the road area. So anything that happens on the road is affected from the land use primarily. So, and this also has a great impact on the informality and other pedestrian exposures. So we have tried to map, and we have tried to map the detailed aspects. How many meters of footpath is there, how much height of footpath is there, how many meters of shoulder width is there, and then what is the type of encroachment that is there, how is it severe, is it moderate, or everything which you can see in the legends. And also we have a detailed Excel sheet of multiple other parameters which we could not show it visually over here. So the development of the proposed indices that we have seen over the urban streets is, we have 5 things in urban streets. First is competition, second the capacity of the road, third is the pedestrian marginalization, fourth is the entropy, how much disorder is there, and fifth is the governance allocation. So why 5 indices? We have multiple parameters affecting. So there is a need for us to quantify and analyze to what extent we can provide solutions, what type of solutions are required for multiple other thresholds. So we have spatial competition index, which quantifies the intensity of multiple user competitions, and then we have effective street ratio (ESRs), which measures the proportion of street space that remains functionally usable after encroachments and roadside frictions. Then we have pedestrian marginalization index (PMI), which evaluates the pedestrian demand, and then street entropy index (SCI), which analyzes the degree of spatial disorder, and then power weighted allocation index (PWAI), which quantifies the distribution of street space. So these weights are rooted from existing literature. The existing literature, we don't have proper quantification and proposal of indexes. With understanding from the literature and understanding from site visits, we have tried to develop these ones. So these weights are conceptual and they can differ from city to city. The results and validation discussion. So starting with spatial competition functional capacity. In Hyderabad, we see that all the roads have enough physical space, the ROW and the carriageway and the footpath. But to what extent is it usable? We see so much encroachment, street vending, multiple types of street vending, and then roadside parkings and other factors which reduce the capacity effectively to 30% is what we have observed in multiple streets. Then we have pedestrian marginalization and informality, and then we have spatial organization and governance. So methodological validation has been provided here, and then we have developed USCS framework, urban street control system using parameter thresholds. So first we have 4 layers, the data and then analysis, decision layer, and the action layer by the government. Then we have thresholds for each index towards which there are interventions specific to the threshold required, and then we have the detailed overview starting from core philosophy and how all the framework evolves. Moving on to the conclusion. So the key contributions of this research paper is that we have developed a non-equilibrium analytical framework to evaluate urban streets as dynamic social-spatial systems, dynamic social-spatial non-equilibrium systems, and we have introduced 5 complementary indices to quantify them, and we have proposed USCS framework as a performance-based governance approach for the urban streets. So this shifts our approach from geometry-based, infrastructure-based to dynamic social-spatial system-based approach by the government. So the limitations of our research that we have observed is the temporal aspects. We could not take like for the whole time. There are multiple other context variations everyone. I'm Priyanka Pradhan. I'm from Manet, and my co-guide is Dr. Simi Ahmed ma'am. So imagine walking through a city where the road infrastructure is continuously changing at the same time. This arises an important question: are our cities becoming more infrastructure efficient at the cost of becoming less green and less comfortable for pedestrians? So, with this question in mind, my study examines the spatio-temporal transformation of urban green spaces in Bhubaneswar between 2015 to 20 and 25 using NDVI and GIS. So, my paper title is Spatio-temporal analysis of urban green space transformation in Bhubaneswar, India using NDVI and GIS. So, urbanization risk. Rapid urbanization is not only changing the urban built form of a city, it also changing the ecological structure of the cities. Basically, the role of green spaces that we see in an urban city are the riparian strips, the urban peri-urban vegetation, etc. that provide climate regulation, air quality, and improvement in water moderation and well-being. There is a loss in their loss is incremental and often difficult to capture without remote sensing. So, urban green space provides several important functions, and however, an infrastructure built-up area expand. As the infrastructure built area expands, it reduces the green spaces and can become area can become isolated or fragmented. The green area can become isolated and fragmented. This becomes particularly important in rapidly developing city of a global south where infrastructure development can move faster than the green infrastructure planning. Bhubaneswar provides the interesting case in the context. Bhubaneswar studies have generally used NDVI. Previous Bhubaneswar study has generally used NDVI as a supporting variable in the LST or urban heat studies. Therefore, this study asks about more direct question, that is, what happened to the spatial distribution of vegetation itself during the smart city development period, as the smart city development started from 2016, so starting from 2015 to 25 this period. So, to answer this question, I analyzed the NDVI pattern for 2015, 20, and 25 within the Bhubaneswar Municipal Corporation, and rather than asking only how much green space has been lost, I do look at where it is remaining and where it is changing and whatever is becoming fragmented. So Bhubaneswar is my study area. It is located in Kota district, and it is bounded by methodology. Here I have to provide methodology, and next we have the analysis. So the first analysis is 2015 NDVI classification, and this classification phase is divided into classes. We have classified the NDVI into various classes, that is very low, low and moderate high. The lowest class broadly represent built up, bare or non-vegetable surface, while the highest class represents dense vegetation. On one methodological point is important here, that we have taken the natural breaks. Their thresholds were calculated independently for each year. So the analysis focused primarily on spatial pattern and the relative distribution of vegetation rather than treating identical numerical thresholds. So basically, in 2015, we can clearly see that the low NDVI class is highest, representing that the low vegetation or the sparse or the clean strips of vegetation are more as compared to other classes, other NDVI classes, and the high NDVI class, that is the forest area, that is Chandaka region, represents the dense vegetation that covers very low area. So next we have the 2020 NDVI classification, where the overall NDVI range become approximately minus 0.02 to 0.46. What remains constant is the low NDVI band through the central urban area. However, the spatial distribution of higher NDVI becomes more disparate, and with the largest high NDVI block shift towards the northwest and the additional smaller patches approaching in the central and southern area. Therefore, the 2020 map suggests that the vegetation pattern is not simply changing in terms of total area, but the spatial arrangement is also changing. Now we have the NDVI of 2025. By 2025, the NDVI range is approximately minus 0.11 to 0.05, giving the widest range among the 3 years, that is previously 2015 and 2020. The low NDVI zones continues to concentrate around central urban area and the major transport corridors. At the same time, the higher areas show wider coverage in part of south and southern west compared to 2020. This is important because the result does not suggest a simple story of continuous vegetation loss. Instead, we observe a more complex process involving recovery in some locations along with fragmentation and spatial redistribution of the others. So we have analyzed the 3 years, 2015, 20 and 25. When the three maps are viewed together, the three major spatial pattern becomes evident. The first is the persistent urban core, as we have already seen in the map that the urban core showed a very wide difference from 2015 to 2025, and the green pattern showed the green area showed very fragmented pattern, and the second was the stable forest block, that is the Chandaka area. The largest continuous high NDVI area associated with the Chandaka forest was in northwest, remains clearly identifiable through the study period. And the third is the fragmented periphery. The moderate to high NDVI patches in the south and southwest shift more noticeably from year to year. So the key finding is not simply green space decreasing, it's rather important that we observe that vegetation remains spatial continuously and arrangements are changing. So, and this distinction between green space loss and green space fragmentation is central to understanding the planning implications of the study area. Now we have how it affects the pedestrian space. So Bhubaneswar is a smart city, and the Bhubaneswar Smart City Planning has placed emphasis on transit-oriented development and public space and walking and cycling infrastructure. However, from a green infrastructure perspective, the development processes also create pressure on the existing vegetation. Our NDVI analysis shows the increasing spatial fragmentation, particularly in the southern and southwestern peri-urban areas. From a planning perspective, this matters because fragmented green spaces may not provide the same continuity of environment function as a large connected green network. So let's come to the discussion. And the findings highlight an important distinction between the area loss and the fragmentation. The Chandaka forest demonstrated a large and relatively continuous green block can remain spatially stable over the study period. In contrast, the smaller vegetation patches in the south and southwestern showed the greater spatial variability. At the same time, the finding extend pre-Bhubaneswar specific research by bringing the observation period into the more recent smart city phase up to 2025. However, I would like to emphasize one limitation, that the analysis is primarily qualitative. Then NPA tells us about the vegetation density and but does not tell about the ecological quality, species composition or actual experience. Now these are the policy recommendations. I have recommended that to promote green streets, integrate annual NDVI monitoring, protect Chandaka forest and reconnect fragmented green spaces, include NDVI and canopy cover, accessing and planning and green infrastructure creation as measurable development hub. So, to conclude the study provides a decade-long spatial assessment of vegetation transformation in Bhubaneswar using NDVI and GIS. The three main conclusions are: first, the low vegetation area is concentrated around the urban center and major transport route, causing making uncomfortable situation for the transportation. And the second is the Chandaka forest remains stable vegetation anchor, but it is not connected with the fragmented vegetation. And however, next step is to move from the qualitative spatial assessment towards quantitative change detection. From quantitative to qualitative change detection, zonal statistic and fragmentation analysis we can do, and followed by field visit validation. The way forward I have included in the conclusion. Here are the references. Major transit corridor that has city. So actually I saw the major change in the major transit corridor, so that's how I. I'll definitely work.
Thank you. That was your last presentation. And by that, we have come to the end of the paper presentation session. On behalf of the conference team, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to our esteemed session chairs, Dr. Gayatri Nanda ma'am and Dr. Naveen Prasad sir.
We're going to take a 10-minute, very short 10 minutes break. After that, we'll assemble again for the panel discussion. So right now, I think 4:55 sharp we'll be beginning with our panel discussion.
Presenting offline, you can stay on here. You should come back as soon as possible because our guests are all here. So we will extend the panel discussion into valedictory. Those who have presented offline and are physically present here, we'll be handing over the certificates to you. But please come back very fast, okay? After the break, right?
strategies that should shape research, policy, planning, and for pedestrians in the global south. I'd like to first introduce our panelists before calling them to the Through 2 decades of academic and professional experience, Dr. Dhuti's work span urban renewal, inclusive development, sustainable urban planning, transport planning, housing, and heritage conservation. His scholarly contributions include extensive publications in reputed national and international journals and conferences on topics urban renewal, land use and transportation, road safety, urban infrastructure, sustainable architecture, and redevelopment strategies. Our next panelist is Dr. Anand Vadekar, Associate Professor and Head of Department of Urban Design, School of Planning and Architecture, Bhopal. An architect and urban designer with academic training from SP Delhi and Hokkaido University, Japan, Dr. Vadekar's research focuses on South Asian urbanism, urban nature, urban history, and resilient city planning. His work explores the evolving relationship between urban form, public spaces, and socio-cultural dynamics that shape cities. With over 15 years of teaching and research experience, he has contributed to several national and international research and consultancy projects, including mapping the socio-spatial divide in Indian cities, building resilient urban communities, the Design Innovation Center, Shelter for All initiative, and the Urban Development Plan for Samut Jonkar, Bhutan. Our next panelist is Dr. Shubhashish Banerjee, Chief Town Planner and Additional Director, TNCT Indore, Government of Madhya Pradesh. He is an accomplished town planner with over 2 decades of experience in urban design and urban planning and governance. He has served as Chief Town Planner, Joint Director, and Deputy Secretary with the Government of Madhya Pradesh. His unique career is academic scholarship and public sector leadership and professional practice, bringing valuable insights from research to the implementation of urban policies. Joining the discussion is Dr. Annapurna Mukherjee, Assistant Professor, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IISER Bhopal. With a PhD from Australian National University, Dr. Mukherjee's research traces the transformation of Calcutta from the colonial to the post-colonial era, investigating themes of memory, nostalgia, spectrality, and the affective dimensions of urban life. Her interdisciplinary scholarship enriches contemporary discussions on how literature and culture memory shape our understanding of cities and their evolving public spaces. Completing the panel is Dr. Suchimita Nair, Assistant Professor, Department of Urban and Regional Planning, School of Planning and Architecture, Bhopal. An architect and urban planner, Dr. Nair brings over a decade of interdisciplinary research experience spanning urban planning, transportation engineering, travel behavior, urban informatics, and inclusive planning. Her academic journey includes collaborations with leading institutions such as IIT Kharagpur, IIT Bombay, Arizona State University, and the National University of Singapore. To moderate this concluding discussion, it is my pleasure to invite Dr. Premjit Das Gupta, Assistant Professor, Department of Architecture and Planning, Bhopal. I invite everyone to the dais so we can start with the concluding session.
Mr. Rajneesh Singh, Director Assistant Habitat Program, Center for Science and Environment, to please also join us in this final panel discussion. So over the last 2 days, last 48 hours, we have been discussing extensively about pedestrian spaces. So where did we come from? Here essentially we came from the idea of walking, as we introduced you to our project also, which is part of our research program called Walking as a Mode of Transport. So what we see walking, which is one of probably one of the earliest modes of transport. Okay, today stands at the intersection of so many different streams of research. So from architecture urban design, to we even had in our discussions, we even had anthropologists contributing, geography, sociology. So even of course climate science, medicine. Today, walking stands at the intersection of so many different schemes of research. So many publications are coming out. So it will be very interesting, for you to look at it, that from how many disciplines papers are being contributed. So from an academic point of view, papers are being contributed to walking. I'm sure we will find an very interesting blend. So that's something like somebody can probably attempt a literature review on that separately. But we were very happy that as organizers, we were able to call people from so many diverse disciplines to our conference, and we are very thankful that they attended. Starting from the first day session when we had Ashwati, the managing director of ITDP India, who talked about the Healthy Streets Dividend project that they were working on. Then we had, when we started our plenary companion discussions, we had Mr. R. Srinivas talked about the governance aspects of walking, and we had theoretical, very interesting works with theoretical lens, on a theoretical lens by Anand Gordika sir and by Himanshu Gutte sir. Also had Devolina Kundu's madam's interesting take on discussion on how NIUA is approaching walking through its different verticals. Then we had second we had Dr. Rupul Joshi, who talked about walking in the city of Ahmedabad. He also introduced us to the Walking Living Lab, the international research program on Walking Living Lab, which CEP has now joined along with University College London. We had Nitya Ramesh, the Director of Urban Planning and Design of Jana Urban Space, which has actually pioneered the Tender Sure program, where we learned about how we are trying to streamline all these different approaches towards designing streets into, I would say, implementable tenders. And we also had Professor Prathalat Chatterjee, who talked about the different facets of, again, the governance of street vending and how it is intersecting the governance of walking. We had Professor Shuli Mitra, who talked about walking in the city of Ujjain and how they have come with, they have attempted a new toolkit for walking in health cities, in holy cities. Then in today's plenary sessions, we had a very interesting discussion where Professor Nirud Paul talked about walking in the context of informal shared mobility. And there were some very interesting videos which we all got to see from his project, Being a Living Lab in Mumbai, which he's carrying out again through a VRA funded project. We had Mr. Rajni Sain, who talked about thermal comfort in outdoor spaces, how we can redesign outdoor spaces to make them more walkable in the face of extreme heat. We had Meghna Malhotra, Director of Urban Management Center, Ahmedabad, talk about the vending guidelines which they have pioneered, which is a very good as to how to integrate walking with vending. And we also had Shreya Banerjee, who gave an excellent presentation on her research on heat and walking. So now I would be initiating the panel discussion with we having on certain topics. I will just approach members one by one. So yeah, so I will start with Dr. Architecture and Planning. So given this background, what changes do you think we should bring in to the pedagogy of urban planning at bachelor's and master's level to mainstream all these different aspects? Because it is taught as part of maybe the standard transportation planning course, but
specifically when we talk in terms of pedagogy, talking about UG courses, PG courses, I think we talk about human-centric planning. So, particularly people started making plan and everything on GIS. So one particular thing which is missing out of this is you don't draw the people, the population which is moving in this street, isn't it? So I think we need to sensitize people about this, and irrespective of whether it is UG studio, PG studio, it
spaces and its ecosystem and pedestrianization as one of the aspects which we address in cities. We are actually talking about a huge phenomenon. So if at all India would like to see itself progress itself as a developed nation, I think it has to address these level issues, grassroots level issues, where we talk about how these can be designed, let's say pedestrian system uses transport and other forms of transport, motorized as well as non-motorized, in harmony with each other. I think that's where the key. So everyone has been talking about that it's not about conflict but rather a negotiation which has to happen, and also a constructive kind of discourse between the two different kinds of system. And that's where I think in pedagogy what we should be focusing on is to look at this aspect not as a problem and not to be given a solution in terms of but rather how do we work them creatively and constructively. That's where the real key is, and that I think has emerged. I was happy to see many presentations which talked about that you can't solve one problem and solve the other, but rather you have to look at the problem in totality and see how it gives result. And I think it's all the word key word was dynamism and between this system, and that's what we need to learn from this. Other major key activity, and because these systems are quite resilient in that way, it becomes quite resilient. So when we talk about pedestrian, again as an identity, as a subject in the city, we are also talking about various kinds of pedestrian identities. That also have much, whether it's based on age group, whether it's based on occupation, whether it's based on location. And I think that is the beauty of it, that we are looking at that diversity, and that's how our studios can be enriched by looking at these multiple identities. So it can't be only one, because then we will fall into the trap of universalization. And that's where the blanket guideline comes and a lot of other things come, which not suit the local context. So that's the lies, that how diversity you can bring in terms of this.
So, Anand sir touched a very important point here. We are talking about Viksit Bharat, Viksit Bharat 2047, the vision of the Prime Minister of the country. And that's a very interesting thing, because in the most developed countries of the world, what we would get to see in their cities is one of the best walking infrastructure. If we go to the highly developed nations, if you look at their walking infrastructure, people prefer to walk. And when we also travel abroad as tourists, or when we go for conferences, we enjoy that, we come back, and we often wish, I would say that Indian walking, Indian cities are very different. They have, I would say, a vibration of their own. But having said that, we could still, there is substantial work that we could still do, and to kind of improve our walking environments. So one of the most important parameters, what I would say, for consideration for Viksit Bharat would be, I think that's one of the recommendations which can emerge from this, is that we improve our overall walking environments. And another important point which sir made was that we shouldn't be going for blanket guidelines, one size fits all. I remember the ITDP guidelines, of course, that's very interesting for students and for as teachers when we guide undergraduate studios. We start with that because, somewhere our IRC codes are, I would say, a bit, like more oriented towards engineering. So sometimes we start with the ITDP guidelines. But having said that, there is a certain, I would say, westernized approach, sanitized approach, I would say, which those guidelines bring. So we should try and develop guidelines which are more suited to Indian cities. So these are two very relevant points which have emerged from what sir has just said. And now I will move on to Dr. Shubhajit Banerjee. Sir, as a senior government technocrat, having served in the government for a long number of years, and also you have been at very senior positions in the development authorities where there is considerable scope for implementing these kind of mainstreaming these kind of approaches. So, how do you think the government sector, the government can probably take a novel approach towards introducing certain reforms so that walkability gets promoted? real revenue.
Thank you, Dr. Vijay. First of all, I congratulate you for having this workshop done here and getting so many brainstorming sessions, and also since it whole system a lot. Before coming to what you asked me, I would just take 5 minutes to then I come to what I start with some of the statistics. It is said that in 30 years of time, India's urban population will double. So now we have around 50 crores of urban population. It will be 100 crores. So this is one data you keep in mind. And then I discuss about second data, which is India has around 31 cars per 1,000 population. So China has 181. So in 30 years of time, we will be also having the same number of cars what China is having. So 180 cars per 1,000. So that means that the urban population will actually doubling, but the population number of cars will be increasing by 6 times. So can we afford that? Probably that is one of the answers that no, we cannot afford to have 6 times more cars in our city. So what is the solution? The solution is public transport. And what the public transport will not solve your problems till the time you address the last mile connectivity. So to address last mile connectivity is very important that we should have our walking areas probably up to the public transport system in place. So we'll have to do away with cars. We'll have to address our walkability in the last mile connectivity. So I'll start with another data. This is a very lot that in the city mobility plan of 2025, the study says that out of 133 kilometer of road network, only 42% roads have the footpaths with it, and only 26% is actually usable. So you only have 26% of the roads covered with the footpaths. So this is the state of affairs in a city which is supposedly doing better in the state, where you only have 26% of the roads with footpaths. So this is one of the challenges. Then I'll just share one experience that my office found 800 meters from my house. So there was a drive that we should be walking more. So I started walking down. So by car it used to take around 15 minutes, and by walk I used to take 11-12 minutes. So I was saying 1 minute also. So I started walking to the office. So I did it for some time, but I could not continue because of different reasons. But here it was a very good experience for me to understand what is the problems while we walk. So there are certain deterrents. I was talking to my neurologist friend one day. So we were having casual discussion. He said that one advice you just know that please don't walk on the roads, because the two-wheelers wear helmets, and otherwise the walkers don't wear anything, no headgears, and there's so many cases which are referred to me with head injuries who were just simply walking by the side of the road. So this was a caution. So this gives you an idea how safe our walking spaces are. So the deterrents which I experienced when I was walking are, I can easily say that our heat conditions, because India is probably a heater, more hot area, so it is very difficult to walk during the summer time. So one is that. Then another problem is honking. It's a terrible honking which we experience when we walk around the road. So this is a serious thing which is to be addressed. My Apple Watch you are not in a safe zone, it is higher than 90 decibels walking on the footpath. So that is one thing which is to be addressed. Then a lot of pollution experience. Then the quality of the footpath, that is a concern. There are parking done on the footpath. Then the safety, as I mentioned, my urologist friend. So there are many issues. Then we are constructing flyovers. So in the city, the flyovers are getting constructed, which is again a big deterrent to the walkers. Flyovers. So these are the some points which I experienced while I was walking to the office. Then we were doing our master planning of the city. So we came up with many ideas how to address these issues in the master plan. So now I will be referring to what he asked me to talk. So first thing we did is we intensely worked on the blue-green network, and we realized that blue-green network is one of a great solution to create walking spaces in the city. So all the channels, you have buffer zones around them, and they are the ideal locations where we can create walking spaces. And our thought mostly goes that footpaths by the side of the road are the solution for walkability. No, I think we need to create separate walking alleys or walking tracks in the city so that they are safer and they are covered with the tree shades so that people can enjoy and they have a better experience by them. Then so we did this intensely so that we create our city level walking infrastructure, and then there are some more solutions we try to address, like the arcades. We need shady spaces to walk. Our footpaths may not work, but the arcades in front of the shops are perfect areas to walk. So like in Newmarket, I mean, it's a very old market, and they are separate plots. All the plots are separate, but what they created, they through building regulations, all the arcades are connected to each other, and you have a nice walking space which is shared also. So it is a comfortable walking in those arcades. So, and also to address the safety issue, I mean, we suggested that no buildings in the commercial area should have walls in front of them, and also the public and semi-public buildings which are there should have transparent walls so that the safety issue also addressed. So there we try to do in bits and pieces. There are certain other regulations which suggest the road sections, how the shades can be achieved. So all those things we have addressed, but it is too less, too little, because in master plan at the city level probably we are not able to address many things. This more can be done at LAP level or the zonal plan level. I hope I could answer some of your questions.
So there are some very interesting comments. I will touch upon them, but before that, I'd just like to share that Dr. Banerjee was a partner in a very important proposal that we had submitted sometime in the last year. In fact, that was also a proposal which was submitted to BRU, Research and Education Foundations. It was for establishing an international research program on 4-year fully funded program, research program, and we had partners from different universities. I was part of a consortium which was led by someone from Sweden. So we had a multi-country team, and I invited because we need local partners also. That was one of the conditions that they had said nowadays. They are very foreign funders that said to this, so they needed a local partner from each city to be on board for actual implementation. So I remember Dr. Banerjee helped us tremendously with his support and also in identifying a local partner and an NGO in Indore who would be helping us if we had got it. Unfortunately, we didn't get it, but the team has got it. Of course, Dr. Vipul is not here. Set was also in the competition, and they were in a consortium with University College London. We were 4 teams which were finalized. I was in one of the teams. Well, fortunately for us, at least we have one living lab funded by DRDF in India at least. first mile or last mile commute safer, more convenient for people. So that is where we need to probably bundle with public transport whenever we are maybe commissioning projects like BRT. It was tried out operational in some cities, may not be operational in some cities, but one of the major things, even for metro systems, I would say nowadays we have huge investment in metro network, including in Bhopal, Indore. But to what extent walkability is being promoted as a first mile or last mile connection to the metro stations? That integrated in the DPR system rather than seen as a separate agenda point or making separate plans. Because when we make separate plans, probably there's always a disconnect. So which agency will work on that walkability plan, which agency is implementing the actual metro. So it is probably better to integrate. Because this is one of the recommendations that we can make. It also touched on the effect of heat on walking that today we were hearing in the session. Definitely, but he has also talked about noise and pollution also. So when we walk, we promote walking today as a healthy, as a healthy activity. That one of our discussion was on the healthy streets dividend. We are promoting it as an active mode of transport, as a means of enhancing health. But then are we not exposing ourselves to the pollution levels which are so high in cities? This is a major concern. So how to promote walkability in the face of that? But we need to address then again the cause of that automobile driven pollution also to walking. And of course, sir was talking about indoors blue green spaces which we had discussed at the time when we were submitting our proposal. It's a very novel initiative. If it works out, I would say it could be something which all other Indian cities can emulate. So thank you, sir, for your contribution. I want to Rajneesh Sareen, sir, as a practitioner, what would say, what kind of knowledge support do you need? Would you require from academia if some kind of vision for that? Because you are implementing these things as a practitioner, supporting the urban local bodies, you are supporting governance. Are there any specific, I would say, ways in which academia can help you out? Is there any thought regarding that, sir?
So I think it's not just about this is working. So it's not only academic. Because academic is we are all part of academics at the start of the career and even depends on whatever level we want to be. First is remove this passenger car unit out from this. Because till you keep teaching LR cardiology, you will never be able to come out from that because your syllabus needs to move ahead of. Because I remember I studied that and we were in Chandigarh come in and do picture or in Gandhinagar and to picture considering you as one of the factors. So today also when this IRC Justin code which you see 2022 which is revised after 2012 and now in 2022, it's again talking about 2 meter, 2.5 meter or something. Right? So if you give lower space to your requirements, the solution will be there. Why are we talking about healthy? What is unhealthy on road? More vehicles, right? More noise is also vehicles. Air pollution is also vehicles. And to great extent, your heat is also because of the vehicle. The reason that is one is the discharge heat because of the extensive use of air conditioning. Because the bounce heat which is there on the street. And second is because now to accommodate so many cars what you have and you need it on chop on the trees, whatever, leftover green. So you know that very well. In this whole street gamut, we know there is only one particular enemy, and I think Dr. Ganji has already said that we need to bring public transport, right? So look at the cities like Kolkata. They are the cities which perform very good on these infrastructure are Kolkata. Why? Because it's a locked city, it's a linear city. One side wetland, second side you have a river. You cannot expand the crazy the way you want. Second city which performs on public transport is Mumbai. Your finger plan, you're again locked. If given an opportunity कि आपको कहा जाए कि CND भर के जैसे आपने नवी मुंबई बनाया पूरा भर दो, तो you will expand like crazy as Delhi has been or maybe Bhopal or other places like that. So we loves problem, right? So because you have, I remember this. We were taught that wherever you want to develop a take a road. So we love taking bypasses. And when you do this and you expect the pedestrian will also run and compete with this kind of development, it's not at all possible. First, think that logically the city, at least we should have a plan of something. Like we get what patriotic areas, right? Neighborhood concept, 1/4 of a mile. Why? Because the smallest child who is in front of the photograph cannot, his limbs cannot take him far off more than 1/4 of a mile because he has to go to school and come back. So now, many of your parents, how many of you actually take your child walking to the school? You can't. So either accept this, that this is a reality, or we really need to move as internationally what people have done. They remove this figure altogether. They move people, don't move the vehicles. So until unless we don't change this, we worked on NEP. I also hear another hat from ITP because we are part of the NEP new curriculum. We tried to bring it down, but imagine professors do not allow that because they have to change their notes. No, I have to give it back to somebody. We are playing a push and roll again. Somebody needs to be playing that.
So now I will come to Dr. Anuparna Mukherjee, who is from, very interestingly, she comes from the field of literature and she has been writing about cities. So, I mean, there is a fantastic role I would say humanities can play placing walking in the popular imagination. So I would just like to ask Dr. Anuparna, how do you see humanity as a whole, or from literature, how do you see contribution taking place in popularizing walking in the minds of ordinary people, as well as I would say the decision makers?
My Thank you for inviting me to this conference. Before addressing your question, I'm sitting here for the last 2 days. One of the things that we realized, I think, by listening to each other, is that we're all trying to kind of grapple with very similar problems, but from different vantage points. So literature does it, let's say, at a narrative level. Architects, town planners, they do it at a more functional level. But at the same time, in literature conference, an architect or a town planner or an engineer is given secondary place. Similarly, when you're talking, another set of conferences, literary scholars are more or less there for some kind of embellishment, some kind of light-hearted refreshment, entertainment, whichever way you put it. It's a kind of a break. Similarly, academics and practitioners, we keep each other at arm's length. We both think that, academics think that, practitioners just work on the ground without any kind of theoretical knowledge. And practitioners think that, academics are all theory and no application. So, again, classroom notes. So, and it's like, that parable that we have heard, or we used to, hear from in our childhood, that it's like a group of visually challenged individuals in a room trying to kind of make sense of an elephant. Somebody is looking at the ears, somebody kind of, the tail, and they're trying to get the whole picture, but they're unable to attend seamlessness. I think what literary readings, and I'm not only literary readings, cultural studies, or for that matter, we kind of also bring in heritage studies, social science as a whole, literature, humanities, and social science as a whole. Again, they from different vantage points try and ask larger questions about, let's say, the rights of, of the social rights of people occupying the street. I mean, we don't take questions like, when we, utter the word pedestrian, we try and kind of what pedestrian means at different, at different levels.
unfortunately is, who has the right to the city? Is the city only constructed for humans? What about the non-human inhabitants of the city? Where do we place them in the ecosystem, the larger ecosystem? Are citizens more equal than others? I mean, what about those populations who are invisible? And we all know that not only in the global south, we often talk about poverty in the global south, but in other parts of the world as well, that there is a substantial section of the population who are constantly invisibilized or ghosted, ghosted not in the term, but more, more generally, who are kind of, kept in the margins, whom we do not want to see during the daytime. They also become occupants of the pedestrian spaces act. So when we're thinking about, spaces, we have to think about, when we're talking about inclusivity, integrated growth, we have to kind of think about, coexistence and co-production, which has been touched upon, in different sessions. So when we're thinking, for instance, it is never, I mean, we are kind of used to think about, thinking in binaries. And one of the things that literary studies kind of teaches you is kind of break the binaries. It's not pedestrian versus vendor. It's not citizen versus so-and bodies. We have to kind of think of it as a continuum. And then I guess, or human versus animals. If we do that, of course, then space become more fraught and contested. And that is one of the few things that probably we have to kind of, through literary readings, cultural readings, kind of sensitize us about these multiple coexistence, which kind of define any kind of space, including pedestrian spaces. That is one point. Another thing that, of course, we were talking about promoting, walkability, and that is a challenge. That in other, of course, in global south, our kind of environment, urban environment, walking is not necessarily, unless it's a fitness exercise, it does not necessarily appear to be a very okay. Unless you have a very pleasant environment, you're in a gated community. Walking is not one of the prospect of walking doesn't sound great. Now, in order to sensitize, one of the many things that we could do is to kind of sensitize people about some of the famous pedestrian practices. We have a very long history in literature and culture about, history of flanering. I mean, of course, experts would know, but how many students who are, talking or working on walkability actually know about the history of flanering in the city? And that flanering, of course, was a more Anglo-Saxon European term, but it has moved beyond the ambit of Europe. It has come to, you have, it has been adapted in different cultures, different contexts, and again, you have somebody like figures like the psychogeographers, who kind of just drift into the city. They look into the emotional, environments, and they draw a certain kind of observations from, from the very idea that how geographical environments can actually influence moods, behaviors, our actions. So that was a very interesting way of actually, talking about pedestrian. We could really sensitize these, people by talking about neighborhood history, walk. Sometimes the history of walking, when we talk about walking, or any history for that matter, it is not merely about glorious things. There are a lot of subversive practices. For instance, in Calcutta and in Mumbai, we have a generation of poets in the 50s and 60s who were extremely decadent in nature. And they would kind of they wanted to break these middle class value system and the taboos associated with nocturnal life. The kind of, so they really indulged in a lot of transgressive practices. They went onto the streets at night, and they took on the streets as a part of their homosexuality. Now, again, while they indulged in a lot of subversive practices, they also popularized the street. They also kind of, made many streets famous, their histories famous, which kind of constantly come through their writing. So if we could also take into account those stories, when we talk about pedestrian history or neighborhood history for that matter, if we could also look into not only glorious and celebratory, heritage, but at the same time talk about the messy things, the difficult part of the heritage. If you look at some of the countries in Europe, they do it very effectively. If you walk through the streets, particularly in Germany, how they're quite, accepting in some sense of the,
about where planning and urban design and humanities can converge. We are talking about the walker as the planner and all those discourses. And that was a great learning experience for me also. And we would definitely, I mean, we should look forward. We should look at to having more of these discussions between disciplines, I would say. And of course, in that, when we were working on the proposal, of course, architect Karna and Dr. Gayatri were also there in that team. For all of us, it was a very enjoyable experience. So, I'll now come to Dr. Naik, Jishmita Naik. So, Jishmita, as I would see you as a transport planner, essentially, and an early career researcher. Okay, so, so in that role, how do you, I mean, yourself contribute to the research agenda on walking, and how do you like to see, I mean, your whatever knowledge you are producing, how do you like to see that accepted by the practice community?
I would like to start in such a way that nowadays when I take urban mobility classes, I do interesting exercises with my students. I ask them to write down or tell me the different modes, transportation modes. Interestingly, I find that most of the time they forget about the walk. They start with the car, two-wheeler, etc., etc., IPD, everything, PT, public transport, but they forget the walk. So these actually it is a thought that we walk. It's not like that we do not walk. We have to walk. Even if we are going to my parking lot, I had to walk. But consistently, unconsciously, we are walking. But when we had to walk consistently, like I have to catch the bus and I have to walk for my last mile, I think that is the problem start from there. So it is I look into this problem as a psychological problem rather than a planning problem, because lots of interventions in today's conferences also we gone through different policies, we talked about that different guidelines there, though we have already sir also mentioned, and we know that there is much more research is required to make our guidelines more context specific, which is not there till now. So context specific in terms of spatial aspect, in terms of our we generally talks that mobility for all. So now we should talk about walkability for all. So for different, whether it is gender sensitive, whether it is elderly or disability, so different groups, what intervention should be. So those things needs to be looked at, facial aspects needs to be looked into it. Now going back to the psychological factors, I believe I also travel behavior researchers, but unfortunately I was working more on, my interest was also more on cars, EV and autonomous vehicles. I work on that aspects as well. But now I believe I should shift after this conference. Thanks for my invitation. Said that this conference actually, when 4 months back, when the president started to talk on this, and then active mobility was in between. I worked on active mobility with some institutions in Europe, but active mobility, transport and health. But as a travel behavior researcher, I think, which is the niche area, in Italy, I was looking into the scope as that what researchers has done with walkability. So different dimensions which is present in this conference is covered. Only one thing is that behavioral nudging. So behavioral nudging, I think that is required. That is the interventions, or when we are talking about the different solutions, but that solutions are limited within the research fraternity. It is not going to the common man. I found that more than 10 lakh researchers are there on transport and health itself, or active mobility and health itself. But the government doesn't know about that. We sending the messages to that. So I believe also agree with Mrs. Nitya what she was saying, that after 40 years of effort, now California has understood about the walkability. So I really thankful to this conference organizers that they have organized a dedicated conference on pedestrian and walkability, because lots of other conferences where this is just a micro domain, or even sometimes it is not even a domain as considered. So that awareness is required, and more research on behavioral
nudging to walkability is required. And another aspect, just the opposite aspect, is that to make our city more safe, not only the people on the behavioral nudging on the walkability influence, but rather also we need to focus on behavior of the drivers. So behavior of two-wheeler drivers, behavior of the car drivers. So assessment on that, how they are behaving when a pedestrian is coming, and what interventions. Though we are talking about different traffic calming measures, but I think those are very preliminary stage. More researches are required for driver behaviors and more interventions based on those researches. I believe that will help us, and practitioners can adopt if we as a researchers provide these kind of solutions which are more context sensitive, which are more behavior responsive. Then that if practitioners apply those, then there might be some changes I can expect.
Thank you, Vishmita. One very important point she talked about behavioral nudging. In fact, when I was talking about the different disciplines which actually are related to walking, I forgot to mention behavioral economics. That nudging comes from the field of economics, and there is some fantastic work, not only for, of course, I haven't really seen any work coming out in walking, but of course in the field of public policy, it is now being a very important tool, and definitely it can play a very big role in promoting walking. Before I just maybe conclude or revisit some of the things before I conclude, I would just like to request Nisha Nair in our audience to maybe say a few words. Just introduce Nisha very briefly. Nisha has been working in the field of, I would say, working as an active promoter of walking. I would talk about her most important identity. She is the coordinator of the next generation. There's a program called the Next Generation Research Scholars Program, which is run by Government and Education Foundations, and she is one of the persons from India who is actually on board, and she plays a very active role. And recently she went to Gothenburg also, where Babu has his headquarters, and they had organized the interesting workshop where I unfortunately some injuries, so I was there at home. But Nisha is playing a very important role, and she also has some very interesting ideas. I will just request Nisha to speak a few words about your course. Nisha is also now finishing her PhD on a very interesting topic which covers the walking of domestic workers, with a case study of Mumbai under Dr. Himanshu Gurte, who was with us yesterday. Nisha, please.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. So, thank you, Jim, for introducing me. So, I think I'll first give a very quick introduction about myself. I'm an architect and I work at the SKLT College of Architecture in Mira Road. I lead the research and development at that school. Other than that, I am also, like Premjit said, doing my PhD. That is how my world of walking has opened up, and I am personally exploring the sections of walking, informality, and gender, which is why me and Himanshu have worked together on a VF project, which I believe Himanshu spoke about yesterday in the first session, which looks at women domestic workers and their walking practices in Mumbai and Lima. So the point was to understand gender and also understand the double marginality of walking, what they experience in their everyday life when they are walking to access work, like a very important mode that they use. And the other thing that Premji briefly spoke about, and I think which is an important thing to communicate at this forum, because there are so many young people here who might think can be a part of the future of walking and sustainable and sensitive transport planning in the future. So VREF runs this next generation program. You go up on the website and see the details. There are 3 large programs that VREF has undertaken. One is the informal shareability program, what all has been a part of, and the African scholars. So this is a very age agnostic space where the current definition is that people who are in their postgrad or people who are doing their PhDs or have just finished PhDs are on the 5-year bracket. And we have also expanded it to early career practitioners, like especially within the South Asian region, because a lot of people are practicing and not necessarily within the study domain. They all can access the next generation community. Community largely operates as a WhatsApp group and through LinkedIn, and across the year it has an itinerary of events which are curated to enable us. Like, so there are multiple things like how to navigate publishing and how to apply for grants, which or how to understand what grants early career scholars can apply to, so that there are these few kickstarts that need for our own career that is enabled. And I think the next gen and VRF just as a community is a very nice space where it's a very non-hierarchical space where everyone has access to each other, and if anyone is interested in doing some work in some other part in the world, then we are all here as a network now to enable that access. So yeah, so whoever is interested in being a part of the community through Prezi can reach out to me and Karen, and also the website is pretty explanatory in terms of how you can subscribe and be part. I would also like to make a very important note that over the last 2-3 years, when we have been a part of this global community, a lot of us South Asian emerging scholars have felt that we can learn from each other. So me, my colleagues from Pakistan, from Nepal, from Bangladesh, we all, when we were at these global summits and workshops in Sweden and London, etc., we felt that there is so much we can learn from each other, but our geopolitics is such that a physical exchange is perhaps not possible. But that is also how we conceptualize and pitch to VIF that we want a dedicated space for South Asian mobilities discussion, which is now called as South Asian Mobilities Forum, and that is going to kickstart on the 23rd September. Again, Premji, I request Premji to send out that that information to all the participants here, so that they can perhaps use that as an opportunity to be a part of the South Asian network. Our plans for the first 2 years are to have online forums. This is following the VREF format. And in the third year, we plan, that is 2029, we plan to have some kind of a symposium or a workshop, again with the focus that it should be able to propel all of us who are working in this space forward with our own researches. Thank you.
Pass the mic to Mr. Paul. Just a few words. Sir, as a practitioner, academic, I would say a practitioner, academic. When you put it with a hyphen. So, your perspective, sir, is giving you a unique position.
Yeah. So clearly, and that's coming through my work. Like first and foremost, like I understand, and as an academician, like to create knowledge is extremely important for me, because that changes the mode of practice that you do. So knowledge, as like somebody like Jennifer Robinson talks about, that we are actually a part of ordinary cities, very ordinary cities which have complexity within their frameworks, and to be able to read the patterns that are there in these cities requires research. Means we don't need to jump into propositions right away. I don't think. In fact, when we were doing even our project, which we showed in the morning, the whole emphasis was to understand, to create new knowledge about informal systems, because I believe informality itself can be a very important framework to understand and theorize our fields. And that's something, because like even as in fact we now realize that most of the time to understand these unseen frameworks,
okay, and I spoke about it briefly, you have to build trust. So, and it's really tough for academic institutions to build trust because our cycles are such that our studios are such that we work for 3 months. So, but sustained research in academics can build trust if one of your like people whom you engage with is the community. I know that today the whole emphasis is towards working with industry, but I think we should consider community also as a part of this framework. Very, very important. I've seen very few institutions do it, but I think that's a very important aspect. Then comes the idea of practice. Then we will be able to generate lot of different possibilities of practice, and that's something I believe fundamental to, like, because otherwise we jump towards propositions means, and that's something which also I believe with Nisha we have been trying in the school, how to like really understand patterns first, create a framework for knowledge, then change the framework for practice, because today is a time we cannot business as usual. We have actually trained architectural practice. We know that we are the people who are partners in crime, and that has been very, very this thing. We might want to, you might want to talk about anything, but saying these are green buildings, but you have to question the act of building now. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
This is a very important point. Talked about working with communities who as academic institutions. How can we evolve the framework of that? And the second most important one, yes, that I would say that's a limitation today, but we can put it as an opportunity. We work in our studios. Of course, we call our studio architecture and we have the concept of labs. So there's always this mismatch in understanding. Our studios are today we're talking of living labs. So, but actual studios have always been, sort of, a living lab, mini lab experiment, but with the limitation of 3 months, as you say. So, how can we probably, maintain that continuity? There is one thing as an institution probably we should look into. Revisiting the same place, maybe at a given interval, documenting it, then again, probably asking certain questions and passing it on to, I would say, practitioners, government. So how do we do it? That's one of the ways that we think we work on post this conference. And before I just open it to the audience for your comments or anything you would like to ask our panelists, just one very interesting thing which just came to my mind was just before the discussion started, I got a call from a journalist who was asking my opinion about there's some kind of barricading here in the old city which is preventing traffic from going in, and the traders in the old city are very educated. It seems that it's a question of livelihoods. I mean, they are entitled to that. So he was asking my opinion is right or wrong. I was in a dilemma. I was not able to answer because I was trying to have to finish my lunch also. But then I just told him that we are organizing this conference right now. One of the points, most important points for us, and also probably for you and the administration, should be not whether the vehicles should be allowed or not. And I mean, whether it is it should be not a fight between certain traders and the government. So why don't we pedestrianize? Why don't we make the entire stretch pedestrianized and we have some parking somewhere and you can walk from there? I mean, that we have seen. We were talking about Viksit Bharat. So as we mentioned, developed country context, we have pedestrianized space in Copenhagen. Sir was also mentioning his visit to Copenhagen in the inaugural session. I've also been there in the Stuttgart or Ian Gale's design. So why don't we try something like that instead of talking about what to restrict, what to promote? We should take a very different approach. So having said that, I would just open it for discussion. If any of you, any audience would like to ask anything. Yes, Nisha. We'll start with Nisha. I think you have a mic.
Hello. Yeah. So I think first of all, Premji, Kari, Kana, and everybody for this wonderful conversation. You have all put together these different studies, and it gives a great perspective when you attend it, especially for someone like me who's engaged in walking scholarship. However, felt that we need to have, we also need to focus on understanding, having a more differentiated understanding of walking. What I mean to say is that not all walking is the same. Like walking happens for different reasons, and the, that being one, and it is conducted by different people. So who walks and why they walk is a very important conversation to bring into our frameworks, right? Because often what is happening is we are talking about walking, which is from a point A to B. And over the last 3 years, as I have been working in this space, I've been very careful not to confuse walking, walkability, and pedestrianization. And these things are not interchangeable, they are all different. And the kind of cities that Paul and I come from, Mumbai, a large part of walking is done by the urban folk. So again, this question of, who's walking and what kind of walking and why are they walking, and also under what conditions they are walking. These become extremely important to address, because I feel sometimes there is a trap where there is a homogeneous understanding of walking and we might end up working towards that. That is one point I wanted to make. And the second I wanted to make is, when we differentiate walking, we also need to break down the act of walking itself. So walking is not just moving, it's also waiting, it's also loitering, it's also talking. There are so many other things that happen along with walking. So especially as architects, designers, it's a uh, very important understanding for us, because that is the way we will start responding to how we conceive spaces. So and a lot of our historic cities have done that. So it's not something we have to invent, like, from the scratch. But a lot of our older cities have done that. They have thought of shade, they have thought about comfort, they have thought about joy, while walking. So that's a point I wanted to make.
Really correct, which is like where the walking was friendship, have little minor details to everything, so green in architecture. And then came the Renaissance, where the speed of beam was invented. Repetitive arts became important, but rather the detailing lost it. So when a city has these two characters in it, the walking style and the variations automatically happens there. Right? So we are in the age of wheel, and that's the area there was no wheel. So pedestrian is something which, when we call it pedestrian something, we are talking about medieval to a great extent, where we don't want wheels to be there. So how these two can actually infuse together in this modern world, that is something which is very tricky to understand, because you have done such an extensive work. Rather than asking anybody else as a question, but it's a good question for you to answer. How to infuse these two together?
I think it's a very long conversation, but I will just be very brief. I can give you, I classified the way you have classified it, and also I like to look at references and cases closer to where we are right now, because I think that's a part of our habitus. So I'll give you a small example. Like Bombay is on a redevelopment spree right now, crazy redevelopment spree. So there used to be shops or ground floor apartments in the in the small buildings, but now those buildings, the character changing, and they are becoming parkings, tilted parkings, and then the housing is shifting upwards. And also the compound wall detail, sometimes the compound walls are extremely solid. So the kind of walking experience in that same neighborhood is changing. And it is now becoming a far more lonelier street. So I think this, the eyes on the street and all those things are going away. So I feel there is a far more nuanced characterization that we can come up with, if, like Paul said, if we just understand what is happening around us better.
Another aspect, just to, I understand where your concerns are. This is now understood understood like that we are in times of what is called simultaneous movements. You have the bullet train which moves at a certain speed. The experience is a very different experience as compared to a city which actually deals with walking. And the problem which actually comes is the idea of city, where to transit, what does transition mean? Like, and very important question comes in, like, do we need expressways in our cities? If there are, then what is the experience of an expressway as compared to like pedestrian streets? Like, so that's I think a different question, you know. Like, and we can actually understand and be able to change this understanding of scales. Like when you're moving from one speed to the other speed, how to articulate. And what you said about when you're walking in the pedestrian scale, detailing is required. That's what you experience. You never experience the city like a bird. Like architects love it now to look like a bird and like observe the city. You don't. When you're a body in the street, your experience of the street is a very different experience altogether. That's where detailing comes out.
Just extending this conversation, I think, not particularly responding, but just taking this conversation, particularly what Nisha said, I mean, that walking is not a homogeneous exercise. I mean, there are different reasons for which sometimes we walk without reason, sometimes we walk because we have to meet someone, sometimes we do it for pleasure. But apart from that, the equally important question that I think she raised, that who has the right to walk in the city? I mean, not everybody enjoys equal rights. And this I can bring it to the question of plein air, because this was something that I thought later that I should give you a clarification there. When we talk about, you know, when we are talking about walkable spaces, walkable cities, who are we trying to privilege is the question that we need to ask. The question of this historical, this whole, you know, figure of the plein air was a privileged male figure. They could, or even we're talking about psychographers, many of them who came much later, they're by and large male figure. You know, a counterpoint to plein air was plein-use, which was a concept that came in much later to kind of, you know, draw out the limitations. When you go to historically public spaces were conceived for men. If you look at any city, and this is not what I'm saying, you know, this is what, you know, the book plein air, the discussion on plein air actually brings about, that, you know, go and count the number of statues that you have of men, heroic figures who are men, and compare it to the number of statues which represent women in a public space. I think the difference would be, apart from all the privileges, apart from, you know, looking at the, you know, the hanger, they're all kind of done keeping men in mind. You know, while, you know, in the 19th century, early 20th century, men were kind of valorized, or not valorized, kind of romanticized for this kind of careless, leisurely walking on the streets. When women tried doing it, they were actually, you know, shamed. They were kind of thought not only decadent, they were actually kind of branded. So in fact, there were women who had to do it not for pleasure but for work. So they started cross-dressing for a very, very long time, just to kind of walk, you know, unimpeded, unnoticed on the street. If you know the story of Johnson, you would probably know. So again, that question we need to keep asking to kind when we are talking about research, improving pedestrian streets, that who are we addressing when we are talking about improvements? Improvement for one section of the society may kind of impose certain dangers of, you know, exposing them to disability, which may be kind of invasive for them. So these are very tangled but difficult questions which we need to kind of encounter, but I think discussion kind of makes it better in some sense.
Karna would like to ask something?
Which was designed for the reading. So it's important for us to understand how are we engaging with the city. Like when you're a pedestrian, you're a
And now with freeways and things like that, you are at a 70-80 kilometer park and so let's say you're on a highway road, the way you relate to the city becomes very different. You see those signboards that toll booth aane wala and all that kind of. So the way you try and engage with the city also becomes automobile centric as compared to when you're walking, let's say 5 kilometers per hour. So one of the ways we could look at it is that maybe start designing for a 5 kilometer per hour architecture rather than looking at, let's say. That's why I said that it's about.
So issue is not the delivery. It is what delivered. So that's why I said that. So for example, any kind of litigation, like you go and challenge government on anything, who will counter answer? There will not be a government person. There will be another professional of your body only on the other side who will counter answer, right? So it's our profession only. So there is nobody else who is actually coming and doing this. So in case, for example, we want this trend to change, and the first thing is that we change how we bring a vision into the eyes of the people who are coming up. True. Now for example, we have a zero emission zones, right? So I'm not sure how many of you have heard about. We are talking about zero emission zones where we are talking about complete pedestrianization, like Amram Kshetram, which is in Orissa, Bhubaneswar. That's the first zero emission zone which is coming up, where we're trying to restrict the complete vehicles. We are promoting all the personalizations. We are even looking at all kind of emissions which would come in. Even restricting the type vehicle delivery times could be more alternate. But imagine how much energy you have to put to do this small act which is there. And that too again will remain at a small place because there are bunch of around 7, 10, 12 temples, and there's a space which you can still hold it and control. We've done it in Amritsar to a great extent, but imagine the hue and cry, Chandni Chowk. Imagine the hue and cry, right? So this is where this. So why this company? Because we have given that kind of space at this stage. So if you have to replace this, do an incremental change into the mindset requirements which we need to do. At least we should have some examples. Even like we are talking about TOD, I am pushing all of us are being more FAR and TOD centric. But end of the day, it's not delivering what we wanted to deliver. It's giving you extra FAR only. That's it. So that's where the problem is. If you bring up any solution, market will take away the economic revenue out of it. True.
Quick question maybe. Our panelist is running a bit short time. Just keep it brief.
On the topic of behavioral nudging, and I think that was a very different aspect that the conference brought up. With a personal experience that from my house to the metro station it's about 100 to 750 meters, but my dad, a layman, is always worried that how will I walk till there because of the traffic, because of the highway next to my house and all of those things. And I think one of the ways in which behavioral nudging is touched upon is by increasing the tax and of cars and vehicles, which is also something how Dr. Banerjee was talking about, jumping from 30 to 180 cars in the near future. So I wanted to ask if probably doing that, things like this, which either Norway, Denmark or Singapore have done, is the only method, or are there more methods that we can, sort of bring in this idea of behavioral nudging? Because to the layman, pedestrianization is not something they really, aspire for. I think open to full
She's working on how to glamorize pedestrian. Until unless your dad still believes of our generation, who still believes roads are unsafe, who still believes we are not provided the infrastructure, he still believes there is a crime on the road. Forget about women, even male आप जाओ चाकू मार देंगे आपको रात को थोड़ा सा लेट सवेरे में इधर उधर जाओ लूट के ले जाते हैं. So this kind of context which is there in the mind is always there because as you said that streets are not porous. You made those walls, आपको boundary wall में तो 6 feet का wall ना के safety with all that whatever the security system you have. But outside the streets there is a problem which is shrooming out. So until unless that's what
गन से जाएगा जानवर, जानवर भी गन पकड़ के चलता है, आप छोड़िए इंसान की बात, जानवर भी ये सोचता है कि मेरा बच्चा सेफ रहेगा या मैं जाऊं या सेफ है कि नहीं, राइट? सो सेफ्टी इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट until unless you don't enrich that into design. आप कैसे एक्सपेक्ट कर सकते हैं कि मैंने ये बना दिया आप चले जाओ, नहीं आएगा. So that is where the medievals were very good at. Medieval planning was thorough in pedestrian designing. We lost that way. How you re-bring that is something which is a context to struggle with.
What you said is number of cars. So I would like to further substantiate this कि दिवाली पे लोगों का डेटा ही है इस साल कितनी कार बिकी है, इंडिया इज इन अ ग्रोथ. तो ये माइंडसेट, मतलब कार इज नॉट द सक्सेस स्टोरी. मिडिल क्लास, एस्पायरिंग मिडिल क्लास सबसे बड़ा इंडिया में, और उसका पहला जो सक्सेस है वो इस परचेजिंग ए कार. ये माइंडसेट जो है ये चेंज करना पड़ेगा कि यू आर नॉट एडिंग एनीथिंग टू द सोसाइटी, यू आर एक्चुअली डूइंग. बट उसका भी काउंटर क्वेश्चन ये कि यू आर एंजॉयिंग कार फॉर सो मेनी इयर्स एंड नाउ इट इज माय टर्न, यू आर सेइंग कार इज नॉट गुड. सो इट हैज टू कम फ्रॉम टॉप.
बट कोरोना के बाद सबसे पहली चीज क्या हो रही है कि ओला उबर में शेयर्ड सिस्टम है. Uber, all they were having shared with, right? You started sharing. I used to has given you a positive perspective. It's not unsafe to travel with another passenger. But today, post-corona, you don't want that. Right? So what economics has done? So this economics is creating a barrier. That is where the problem comes in. Diwali पे गाड़ी आप भी लेने जाते हैं, आपका पड़ोसी बोल बोल के बोलते हैं 10 साल
That is what we were having a discussion amongst ourselves, that even if like we are from Gurgaon and we often visit Saika, so it's very connected, last mile connectivity is there, you just have to walk out of your office and you take metro. But the CEO or a person in position who never do. They still come by car, they have to park in the basement, come to the office and have their time. But again, like you said, we question, we have to question the people who are in charge. If they are representing this sort of behavior, it would never change. We always aspire to be in their position. Today I'm working as an architect, I would love to be a CEO of the company eventually. And once I'm in that position, I would be questioned again, sir said that you come by metro or तुम्हारे पास कैसी गाड़ी है. So that sort of discussions also need to happen. And another point that I would like to mention is we have been romanticizing walking. And like I have a question, do the two worlds that our society has, one is the privileged one and the non-privileged part of society, can they come together? If we are looking at pedestrianization, I don't see a lot of people from the other side, either side being comfortable coming together or being in city or using the same space. So I don't know how we are going to solve that problem, but it just, I can't even imagine that situation happening.
other than Regi, MNG, HA, we have the same society, we all walk the same
In the society.
in the society only. Like for example, if you're in Gurugram, so you can, even the economically weaker section, you have to provide certain number of flats within that gated community. Otherwise, your plan will not be.
Unfortunately, they are not
Now comes the real question is that EWS flat which you make is taken over by some other. So Chandigarh, for example, the EWS houses are still EWS. Reason for that is they never been as quality. आप खरीद नहीं पाओगे. So चंडीगढ़ में जो फ्लैट्स बनाए ली कार्बोरेटर के टाइम पे वो अभी तक इकोनॉमिकली वीकर सेक्शन के पास. So that's the, so you define a solution in your design. हमारा डिजाइन बनाता ही ऐसा है कि आप लेके वहां जाओ जहां मार्केटर्स को सेल करने के लिए तुम करते हैं. So this is where the problem lies.
You actually said a very pertinent point. जो pedestrian है वो सारा ill-treated, उसको रोक दिया तो उसको honk करेंगे. We don't respect the cyclists, we don't respect the pedestrians walking in on the street. ये एक problem जिस probably कोई जो है affluent आया, middle class aspire कर रहा है, middle class के पास कार है, वो उसको लगा कि ये cross that barrier and तो जो दूसरा point है वो probably based from Bombay will agree to me. Cultural reasons भी हैं. Bombay एक शहर है जहाँ पे मैंने I have seen the richest guy traveling on in the metro
just, I would say, wind up the session for now. And just to leave. So, sorry.
I can leave, you can continue. My only is a car. Pressure on me that I am eliminating guest house, now I am here. When are you coming out? So I have a pressure from overseas.
Yes. As we conclude this session, I would like to extend our gratitude with a token of thanks. Firstly, I would like to request Dr. Dasgupta to kindly present the memento to Dr. Dhoti sir. I would like to also request Arctic Kanra Singh Gupta to please present the memento to Dr. Vadvekar. Dr. Vadvekar. Kanra sir, I would also like to request you to please present the memento to Dr. Banerjee. Thank you, sir. Now I would like to request Gayatri to please present the memento to Dr. Nair. I would also like to request Gayatri ma'am to please present the memento to Dr. Banerjee. Finally, ma'am, Gayatri ma'am, I would like to request to please present the memento to Dr. Nair.
We should clap for a bit louder.
With this, I would like to conclude the final session. I would also like to request Dhoti sir, Shubhashri sir and Madhvika sir to please remain on the dais for the validation. We will be distributing the certificates. We will be starting with the validity session. Thank you, panelists. First, we'll like to have a photograph with Rethinking sir, please.
We quickly thank everyone who has been a part of this conference, from management, from SEA, from ITPI, for all panelists, speakers, moderators who could join us in person. 2 more minutes and we are finishing off. The ones who actually took the effort of coming here with us, we are very thankful for your time, the ones who could join us online, and all the presenters. The volunteers tried their best to put up a good show. Please accept our apology in case any oversights we intended to do. Thank you so much for all your time and efforts, and hopefully our paths will cross again and we're going to discuss our favorite topic, walking cities. Sir, please come to the can we have the certificate distribution? I would ask for you to announce the names. Please come as your names announced for this.
Can we please encourage with a bigger round of applause? Then we have Shobhan Sachin. Shobhan Sachin. Mohammed Afzal Khan. Mohammed Afzal Khan. Pratha Sharma. Pratha Sharma. Kunal More. Is Kunal here? Can we give the round of applause coming to Kunal More. Suhas Tarwani. Suhas Tarwani. Zarka Rahman. Is Zarka here? Anushka Singh. Do we have Anushka Singh? Nishtha Jain. Nishtha Jain. Naisha Asani. Naisha Asnani. Maulik Chauhan. Do we have Maulik here? Siddharth Madan. Siddharth Madan? Yes. Just a few more names. Can we keep tracking? And Dhruv Pandey. Thank you so much, sir. We've completed our valedictory session. This marks the end of the conference as well. Thank you. Videos on that. So just one certificate, I think. Shika Sharma. Anshika Sharma. Priyanka Pradhan. Raghav Verma. Yes, I'm sorry for the certificates that we have made. We'll update them later. With this, we are doing the conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Wonderful.